Hey, Rufus, it's story time. Where are you going? Is he going to be in like a chicken suit or. Oh, you're back. And you've got a carpet square and some milk. Okay, anyway, yes, story time. So, a little while ago, I happened to be walking around the campus of a certain university in North America. I won't say which one because I'm not trying to heap scorn upon any one particular university, and I'm sure this sort of thing has happened in many different places. Anyway, I was walking around the campus and I saw a sign on the outside of one of the buildings that said Office of the Ombudsperson. I think this was the first time I'd ever encountered the word ombudsperson, but I quickly deduced what the word was supposed to mean, since I'm familiar with the word ombudsman. I assume someone thought the word ombudsman was not inclusive gendered language and created the word ombudsperson as an inclusive, gender neutral alternative. I get it. This, however, struck me as silly. So let's embark on a journey of discovery, dear viewer, and find out if a woman can be an ombudsman. This could be a long one. Blackboard! Okay, so let's do the obvious thing first and dig up the etymology of the word ombudsman, which should strike you as a non-native English word due to, well, how weird it looks. I mean, try to think of another English word that has ombuds in it. There aren't any, because the word ombudsman is borrowed from Swedish. Way back in 1713 in Sweden, King Charles XII noticed that while he was spending most of his time fighting wars outside his country, his administration was falling apart in his absence. He decided to appoint a representative for himself to act while he was away, which he called the King's Supreme Ombudsman. Now, I don't speak Swedish, so I'm not going to try to read any of the Swedish words besides ombudsman in this video. Thank me later, Swedes. This title was soon changed to Chancellor of Justice, but when a new government was formed in 1809 after King Gustav IV Adolf was deposed, the office of Parliamentary Ombudsman was formally established. This government office still exists in Sweden today and has inspired many similar offices in the governments of other nations. Okay, fine, but what does the word mean? The ombud part means an agent or a representative, and the man part means, well, man.
Mono means one, and rail means rail.
More on that later, as that's the more interesting part of the word for today's video. In the original Swedish context, the ombudsman was established as an independent investigator of complaints against the government. In non-Swedish context, an ombudsman is a facilitator or mediator in disputes, again, someone who handles complaints. So the important question, is the word ombudsman a gendered word? This is an interesting question, so I'm going to look at some different ways of answering it. One way to think about it, and a pretty good one if I do say so myself, is to treat ombudsman not as a native English word, but as a foreign loan word, because, well, that's what it is. So we might modify the question slightly and ask, is ombudsman a gendered word in Swedish? Now, I don't speak Swedish, but after investigating this question extensively, I think the answer is either no or technically yes, but it's not a big deal. Let me explain. First of all, Sweden is one of the most gender-equal countries in the world, at least according to the UN and the EU's gender equality indexes. The Swedish government's website has an entire area devoted to policies on gender equality, and the official website of the country has a page that says, equal power and influence for women and men. That's what Sweden is aiming for on it. So, we're not talking about Afghanistan here. If you look at the government's website for the Office of the Ombudsman, you'll see that it only uses forms of that word to refer to people holding that office, despite one of the four of them being a woman. Now, that's not to say that there isn't any overtly inclusive language on this page, though. You can see the phrase he or she in the first paragraph, people later, and what looks like the word man in the last paragraph, which, confusingly enough, is a gender-neutral third-person pronoun in Swedish, roughly equivalent to the English one. Furthermore, the Swedish government has an academy, one of the duties of which is to oversee the Swedish language. The academy produces a comprehensive dictionary of the Swedish language, which is searchable online. A few things to note here. At the time of this video, there is no entry in the dictionary for any gender-neutral equivalents of ombudsman, like ombudsperson, which would be fine in Swedish as person means person.
Rail means rail.
Or this, which would mean ombudswoman. The dictionary definition, for what it's worth, of the word ombudsman in Swedish begins with the word person. So it's at least clear that the word in Swedish is definitionally, if not etymologically, gender-neutral. Practically as well, as I said a second ago, women can and do hold the office of ombudsman in the Swedish government. Now, updating a dictionary takes time, so by necessity, any dictionary will always be at least slightly behind the times in documenting how modern speakers are using the language. So the fact that these words don't appear in the Academy's dictionary doesn't mean that nobody in Sweden uses them. but it does at least tell us something about the official status of alternatives for ombudsman. So either the Swedes don't consider the word ombudsman to be gendered, or they don't consider it to be a big enough problem to warrant changing the word to something like ombudsperson. I can't know for certain which one of those two it is, but this is a language channel, so just for fun, let's talk about grammatical gender in modern Germanic languages. Now, Proto-Germanic, the theoretical reconstructed ancestor language of all the modern Germanic languages, probably had three genders for nouns: masculine, feminine, and neuter, like one finds in other ancient Indo-European languages like Latin, Greek, or Sanskrit. Modern Germanic languages, however, diverge quite a bit in terms of grammatical gender. On the radical anarchist side of the spectrum, you've got English and Afrikaans, which have both jettisoned grammatical gender for nouns entirely, while on the sensible conservative side, you have German, Yiddish, and Icelandic, all of which still make distinctions among masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. In the middle, though, some other solutions show up. In Danish and Swedish, as well as in certain versions of Dutch and Norwegian, the masculine-feminine distinction has been lost, such that there are only two genders, usually translated in English as common and neuter. In Swedish specifically, these two surviving genders are named with Latin words, utrum for common gender and neutrum for neuter, literally either and neither, that is, either masculine or feminine and neither masculine nor feminine. So maybe the fact that Swedish has lost the distinction between masculine and feminine nouns has made Swedish speakers less invested in the inherent gender of certain words. In English, though, nouns don't have gender at all, and we still manage to fret over gendered language. This leads us to the heart of the issue then, which is the English and Swedish word man. The word man goes all the way back to Old English and is a native Germanic word, so some form of the word appears in all of the Old Germanic languages. The earliest sense of the word man in Old English is that of human being, that is, man as opposed to animal. Old English had separate words for man as opposed to woman, wer and weef, or sometimes wapman and weefman. In those second forms, you can clearly see that the man portion just means human being. By about the 12th century, however, the masculine forms wer and wapman disappear, and man starts getting used for both human, generically, and adult male human specifically, just as the two senses exist in modern English. Interestingly, many other Germanic languages have developed a separate word for human being through some kind of suffixation, thus avoiding the problem that other languages like English have with the two separate usages of the word man. Now, English does have the word mankind, but this word exists in addition to, rather than instead of, the word man. Predictable digression about Latin and the Romance languages here. Classical Latin has separate words for human and man. The word for human, homo, genitive hominis, is the genus name in Homo sapiens, the biological name for humans. Just a quick note on that Latin phrase, because people often misanalyze it. The S on sapiens is not a plural suffix. Homo sapiens is singular. Sometimes I hear people refer to a quote-unquote homo sapien, but that's not how the word works. Sapien is not a word, right? So always keep that S on there, even in the singular. Also, don't confuse this Latin noun with the similar-looking Greek adjective homos, meaning same, which is a prefix in words like homosexual or homogeneous. Anyway, the classical Latin word for man as opposed to woman is vir, which is the root of English words like virile, virtue, triumvirate. That word didn't survive into the Middle Ages, though, so the Romance languages generally have the same problem as English. The Latin homo now exists in the Romance languages as both the word for human being and adult human male. Digression within a digression here to talk about the word human for a moment, which some people object to as a replacement for man or mankind in English because it still has the letters M-A-N in it. In fact, the Latin word homo and the adjective humanus probably both come from the same Proto-Indo-European root meaning earth, which is not the same theorized root of the word man. So the resemblance is just a coincidence. That is, the man in human is not the same man as the man in mankind or in ombudsman, for that matter. Now I'm really stretching, but let's do the ancient Greek words too while we're at it. Did the Greeks have separate words for human being and adult male? They did. The Greek word for human is anthropos, whence the word anthropology, the study of human beings. The word for man as opposed to woman is aner, genitive andros, whence words like misandry, philanderer, and android, also the name Andrew, actually. Right, back to English. So, what do we as modern English speakers do about this man-mankind situation? Do we parse ombudsman as gendered and change it to ombudsperson? I think there's room for disagreement on this question, but to me the answer is no. Now, as a linguistic descriptivist, I emphasize the primacy of usage over etymology and definition. Etymologies are not definitions, and definitions are often not in perfect alignment with usage. So who's the ultimate authority on what a word actually means? The people who speak the language, in my opinion. Here, let me give you an example using a non-controversial word. How do you use the word presently? Like, if you ask me when I'm leaving my house and I say presently, when am I leaving? Right then, in that very moment, or in a few minutes, like soon but not right away? Now, the way I've always used that word is in the latter sense. Presently means in a little while, shortly, or soon, not at present or now. This is definition 1b for the word presently in the OED, and you'll note that it says that this is, quote, now the usual sense of the word. However, definition 2 is at the present time, or now, with the note that this usage was historically avoided in writing but revived in 20th century US English. It also points out that many modern writers consider this usage of the word to be wrong. So even though my usage of the word presently is older in the dictionary and many writers consider the newer usage to be wrong, in practice I've stopped using the word my way because I've noticed that most people I talk to use the word exclusively in its second definition. It would be obtuse of me to say presently in the older sense to someone who I know is going to understand it in a newer sense. I can complain all I want about my definition being older and the newer one being wrong, but the fact is I seem to be outnumbered on this one. Now, if we copy and paste this line of reasoning onto Ombudsman, we see that the etymology and the history of a word don't matter nearly as much as its contemporary usage, and to me, the word ombudsman has genuinely gender-neutral usage. That is, nobody who sees or says the word ombudsman is explicitly thinking of a male to the exclusion of a female. I don't think anybody enters an ombudsman's office, sees a woman behind the desk, and then asks with confusion, what are you doing here? This is primarily a pragmatic argument, but I understand that others might want to make a more deontological argument about extirpating the vestiges of patriarchy from our vernacular. So, the very last, I promise, I'm almost done going on about this, the very last thing I'll mention here is the etymological fallacy. I've already kind of invoked this principle in my presently example, but I'll spell it out more clearly here. One commits the etymological fallacy when asserting that a word's derivation or original meaning can be the only true meaning of the word. Now, obviously, this can't be right, since words change their meanings all the time, and there would be utter chaos if people tried to relearn the English language using only now archaic or obsolete original definitions of words. The reason this kind of argument is fallacious, though, is that it's only ever applied capriciously and as post hoc reasoning. That is, people only reach for the etymological fallacy when they've already convinced themselves that a word needs to be changed or disused and need some kind of argument to justify it. When people try to argue that ombudsman is gender exclusionary language, for example, they're committing an etymological fallacy, asserting that the word is exclusively masculine due to the etymology of the word and ignoring the way people actually use the word in practice. You'll notice that one could also make the same mistake in defending the word by pointing out that the original definition of man in Old English is not gendered. I avoided making that argument on purpose because it's also an etymological fallacy. Now, if you're still desperate to hang on to the gendered language argument, just imagine how much work you'd have to do in order not to be cherry-picking and haphazardly applying that argument. For one thing, you'd need to know the etymology of every English word you use, which would include being able to spot derivations from gendered words from non-obvious sources like foreign loanwords. I recommend reading the Oxford Dictionary of English Etymology to get started on this project. It's over 1,000 pages long, though, so you might want to clear out your schedule for the rest of the day. Okay, I can feel myself getting snarky, so I better wrap this up. In conclusion, to the question, can a woman be an ombudsman, I say yes. Her name is Katarina Paulson. Yeah, I guess I could have. Well, shit, Rufus. You think it's too late to just start over?